The clank of cold metal against stone echoed through the damp cell, sealing his fate. The Germans had captured him, alone, surrounded, and broken. Yet, amid whispered prayers and the heavy silence, a single spark ignited inside him, something no captor could snuff out. What he did next, hidden in the shadows of the enemy's fortress, would shock allies and foes alike, rewriting the story of courage and despair. On a cold morning thick with fog, before the war had locked him behind bars, he sat beside the river, the kind of river that held secrets and memories alike. The water moved with quiet purpose, each ripple carrying away pieces of yesterday while forging new paths toward tomorrow. His name was Klaus, though in this moment he was simply a young man watching the current flow, unaware that his life would soon become a testament to human resilience. His fingers traced the edge of a worn photograph, a woman with eyes the color of twilight and a smile that could warm the coldest morning. She was his wife, and she was waiting. In his pocket, wrapped in oilcloth, was a letter he had written a dozen times but never sent. It spoke of dreams beyond the war, of a small house with a garden, of children who would never know the thunder of artillery. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans. The river would remember him. The water carried whispers of his name long after his footsteps faded from its banks. The capture. The night the world turned against him was painted with fire and screaming metal. Klaus was a radio operator for the resistance, a bridge between scattered cells fighting against the occupation. He spoke 3 languages and understood the geometry of signals, how waves traveled, how messages could be hidden in the static between stations. They came for him at midnight, boots pounding on cobblestones, flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. He had been betrayed. Someone had talked. Someone had broken under pressure. The room exploded with splintered wood as the door gave way. He had seconds to destroy the codes, to swallow the microfilm if he had to. But there was no time. Hands grabbed him, rough and certain. A rifle butt struck his temple. The world tilted, blurred, came back into focus with the sting of blood in his eye. "Where are the others?" they demanded. He said nothing. They hit him again. By dawn, he was in the fortress, a castle from another century that the war had turned into a prison. Stone walls that had once echoed with laughter and music now held the sounds of suffering. They stripped him, searched him, took everything. Even the photograph, they laughed at it, held it up like a trophy. "She'll forget you," one said. "They always do." They threw him in a cell with no window, no light, only the smell of damp stone and despair. The door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to say, "This is the end." But they had underestimated something. A man with nothing left to lose is not necessarily a broken thing. Sometimes he becomes something else entirely. In the darkness. Time in a cell has no meaning. It stretches and compresses. The only light came from a thin strip under the door, and the only sound was the shuffle of guards, the distant cries of other prisoners, and his own heartbeat. They came for him daily. Questions, threats, pain. Each session in the interrogation room was a test of how much a human being could endure before breaking. They wanted names, locations, plans. Klaus gave them nothing, not because he was brave. He was terrified. Not because he was unbreakable, he was already broken in places they couldn't see, but because in the darkness, he had found something they could never take away. It started as a sound, a hum, barely audible, coming through the pipes in the wall. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he recognized it, a frequency. Someone, somewhere, was sending a signal. He pressed his ear to the cold metal and listened. It was Morse code. Weak, struggling, 3 dots, but persistent. 3 dashes, 3 dots. SOS. But not just that. There was more, a message within the message. Over days, through the pipes, he began to receive. A voice from another cell, another prisoner who had once been a radio technician. His name was Jan, and he had been trying to reach someone, anyone, for weeks. They developed a system. Klaus would tap on the pipes, Jan would respond. They created a language of knocks, a conversation in code. Klaus learned that they were in a fortress that housed not just prisoners, but information. Communications headquarters, the nerve center for regional operations, and somewhere within these walls, there was a radio, if they could reach it. But how? They were in cells, guards everywhere, searchlights scanning the walls at night. Then one morning, everything changed. The spark. The guard who brought his food was young, no older than 18, nervous eyes. He dropped the tray hands that trembled. And Klaus saw fear in his face, not of the prisoners, of something else. That night, through the pipes, Jan told him the rumor. The young guard's name was Friedrich. His brother had been killed in the bombing of Dresden. He hated the war. He wanted out. This was the spark. Over the next week, Klaus worked on Friedrich, not with words. Friedrich wouldn't dare speak to a prisoner, but with humanity. He would leave small things in the tray, a drawing done returned with a piece of charcoal scraped from the wall. A note, written in German so simple and honest that it couldn't be mistaken for code. "War steals all our brothers," one note read. Friedrich never responded directly, but he started leaving things too. A piece of bread larger than ration, a blanket on a cold night, a glance that lasted a second too long, carrying a message of its own. The breakthrough came on the 17th day of Klaus's imprisonment. Friedrich dropped the tray, and this time, something rolled across the floor. A small key, almost invisible against the stone. Klaus's heart stopped. He looked up. Friedrich's eyes met his. A nod. A whisper, so quiet it was barely there. Midnight. The key was for the cell door, not the main door, just the inner lock. But it was something. That night, Klaus waited. He could hear the guards changing shift. He listened to their footsteps, counting, memorizing patterns. When the key turned in the lock, it made a sound like thunder breaking. But the corridor was silent. He pushed the door open slowly, inch by inch, his muscles screaming from atrophy. The hallway was empty. A single bulb burned at the far end, casting long shadows. He had no shoes, no coat, only the thin prison uniform. But he had a purpose. He tapped on the pipes, 3 sharp raps. A pause. 3 more. Jan's cell was 3 doors down on the right. Working together, he heard movement planned this moment. Jan had knowledge of the fortress layout. He had been transferred here from a work crew that had repaired the heating system. Through the pipes, Jan tapped out directions. Right at the corridor, past the guard station. He would be asleep at this hour. They knew his pattern. Second door on the left, the communications room. But there were guards. Always guards. As Klaus moved, he heard footsteps. He pressed himself into an alcove, heart pounding. 2 guards passed, talking quietly about a football match. They didn't look in his direction. The communications room door was locked. Of course it was. But Friedrich had thought of that too. Scratched into the wood, almost invisible, was the combination to the padlock. A gift wrapped in risk. Inside, the room hummed with electricity, banks of radios, stacks of equipment, the smell of ozone and warm vacuum tubes. This was the nerve center, the place where orders were sent, where soldiers died based on words transmitted through the air. Klaus moved to the main transmitter. It was powerful, military grade. With this, he could reach London, Paris, the free world. But he had to be careful. Any transmission would be monitored. They would triangulate. They would find him. Unless... He opened the frequency log. The Germans used a pattern, rotating through frequencies to avoid jamming. But patterns could be broken. If he sent a message on a frequency they were about to abandon, it would be in the air for only seconds. Just enough time. He set the transmitter. His fingers, once trained for this, remembered the motions. He pulled out the microfilm they hadn't found, tucked in the sole of his foot, under a layer of skin that had healed over. They had searched everywhere else. The microfilm contained everything: the fortress layout, troop movements, the location of the concentration camps, the names of collaborators. It was the intelligence that could change the war, but he couldn't just send it. Not yet. He needed to do something else first, something no one expected. He started to transmit. The shock. The message wasn't in code. It wasn't a military transmission. It was something different. Klaus broadcast on every frequency he could access. He spoke in German, then English, then French. He told a story, not a spy story, not a war story, a human story. He spoke of Friedrich, the young guard who had lost his brother. He spoke of his wife by the river, of the dreams war had stolen. He spoke of Jan in the next cell, of the others whose names he didn't know but whose suffering he felt through the walls. He spoke of the photograph they had laughed at, and he described it. The woman's eyes, her smile, the way the light had captured her on that day by the river. And then he said this: "To whoever hears this, know this. We are not numbers. We are not prisoners. We are not enemies. We are human beings, and we remember. We remember who we were before the world caught fire. We remember who we could be again. Tell them. Tell everyone. Let the river hear this message and carry it to every shore." For 3 minutes, he spoke.
3 minutes,
3 minutes of
jamming
truth
and encryption.
in a world
through
of fear
lies.
and propaganda. In the fortress, alarms began to sound. He could hear boots running. They knew. They were coming. But he wasn't finished. He switched to the encrypted channel he had found in the frequency log, the one the Germans used to coordinate with their command, and he sent the microfilm data, not once but 3 times, in 3 different codes. The Allies would pick it up. They would understand. The door burst open. Guards rushed in, rifles raised. Klaus stood from behind the transmitter. He looked at them, and for the first time, he smiled. Not with mockery, with peace. They hit him. They beat him. They dragged him back to his cell. But something had changed. The aftermath. In the days that followed, Klaus waited for the punishment he knew would come. They would execute him, or worse, they would make him disappear into a system where no one would ever know what happened. But the guards Friedrich was gone, transferred, or perhaps worse. New guards, harder and colder, took his place. The interrogations intensified. They demanded to know who else was involved, how he had accessed the equipment, what else he had sent. Klaus said nothing. He had already said everything he needed to. Then, on the 7th day after his broadcast, something happened. The fortress went on high alert. Ships were mentioned, troops moving. Something big was happening in the channel. Through the pipes, Jan tapped out the news he had overheard. The broadcast had been received, not just by the Allies, by the Germans too. It had caused confusion, delays, questions, and in that confusion, a convoy had been spotted. An operation had been disrupted. But more than that, the story had spread. Prisoners in other cells had heard fragments. Guards had heard whispers. The truth had a way of moving through stone walls. Klaus's wife, in some distant place by a river, would never receive his letter. But she would receive something else, a story that would reach her, carried by survivors, by refugees, by the river of humanity that flows through war. Weeks turned into months. The war raged on. But inside the fortress, a quiet rebellion had taken root. Guards spoke to prisoners with something like respect. Food portions improved. The beatings became less frequent. Not because the system had changed, but because humanity had found a way to survive within it. Jan was moved to another prison, but before he left, he sent one final message through the pipes. One, you changed the river's course. Klaus never learned Friedrich's fate, but he imagined him somewhere, telling his own story, finding his own way through the war. As for Klaus, his time came eventually. The fortress was liberated in the final days of the war. Soldiers found him in his cell, thin, bruised, but alive. When the cell door opened, the first thing he saw was the sky. Clear, blue, endless. And for a moment he was back by the river, a young man with a future. They asked him his name. He told them. They asked what he had done. He thought about the broadcast, about the microfilm, about the small key and the young guard. He thought about the spark that had ignited in the darkness. So I told the truth, he said. Epilogue. The river remembers years later. Klaus stood by a different river. This one flowed through a city rebuilding, through streets where children played without fear. He was older now, his hair gray, his hands scarred. He had written the book. He had told the story, not just of his capture and escape, but of the small moments that made survival possible. Of Friedrich, of Jan, of the guards who chose humanity over orders. And one day, a letter arrived. It was from a woman who had been a child during the war, who had heard his broadcast on a hidden radio her father kept in the attic. Ed, you said you were by a river, she wrote. I want you to know, your voice reached one. It reached me, and I have told my children. We remember. Klaus folded the letter and put it in his pocket, next to a new photograph, one of his wife, his children, his grandchildren. The river in the picture wasn't the same one from his youth, but it didn't need to be. All rivers lead to the sea. All stories find their way to someone who needs to hear them. The war had taken much from him. It had taken his freedom, his innocence, his youth. But it had given him something too, the knowledge that even in the deepest darkness, a single voice, a single spark, can light the way for others. And that is the true shock of his story. Not that he escaped, not that he survived, but that he chose to speak when silence would have been easier. He chose to be human when the world demanded he be a monster. The clank of cold metal against stone may have sealed his fate, but it could not seal his voice. And that voice, carried by the river of human memory, flows on still. In the fortress of shadows, a man found his voice. In the silence of a cell, he discovered the power of truth. And in a world torn apart by war, he reminded us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. This is what he did next, story. And this is why it shocked everyone, because it proved that even when captured, even when broken, even when surrounded by darkness, the human spirit remains undefeated. The river still flows, the story still travels, and somewhere, someone is listening. End of story. The echo in the archives. Decades after the war, in a government archive basement in Berlin, a young historian named Elena discovered a dusty file labeled Intercepted Transmissions, 1944. Inside, among hundreds of military communiques, she found something that didn't belong. It was a transcript, but unlike the others, no coordinates, no troop movements, no code, just a voice, captured by German counterintelligence as they tried to triangulate its source. She listened to the recording on an old reel-to-reel machine. The audio was crackly, filled with static, but the words came through clear enough. A man, speaking in German, then English, then French. A story about a guard named Friedrich. A photograph by a river. The words that would later echo through history. We are not numbers. We are not prisoners. We are not enemies. Elena sat in silence as the 3-minute recording played out. When it ended, the machine clicked and whirred, and in that moment she understood why this particular transmission had been preserved instead of destroyed. Even the enemy had recognized it as something different. Something that needed to be remembered, for reasons they themselves didn't fully comprehend. She would later learn this was Klaus Haas's broadcast. But what she found next changed her life. In the same file, a handwritten note from a German officer, dated 3 days after the broadcast. The prisoner continues to refuse to name accomplices. However, morale among guards is unstable. Some are asking questions. This is dangerous. The broadcast may have been heard by our own people as well as the enemy. Recommend immediate transfer and disposal before infection spreads. Infection? That's what truth was called in a world of lies. Elena traced Klaus's path through other records. Transfer orders, interrogation logs, and then, miraculously, a liberation report from April 1945. A thin man, barely alive, found in cell 12. The same cell number from his story. She searched every database, every roster, identity of the guard. No Friedrich matched the description. It was as if he had never existed. Until she found the transfer list from March 1944. A name, crossed out, with a single word written next to it. Disappeared. Friedrich had vanished from the system. Not transferred, not executed. Simply gone. Some speculated he had been sent to the Eastern Front as punishment. Others said he was executed quietly. But Elena found another possibility, buried in a report from a rural police station 200 kilometers away. A man matching Friedrich's description had been found dead by the tracks. No identification, no witnesses. But in his pocket, a photograph of a woman by a river, and a small key wrapped in cloth. The key that had opened Klaus's cell. Friedrich had made it out. Not alive, but he had made his choice. He had given Klaus the key, knowing what it would cost. And when the investigation began, when they searched for the source of the leak, he had taken a different path, one that led away from the fortress, away from his family, away from everything. Elena traced the photograph. The woman was Friedrich's sister, killed in an Allied bombing raid 2 years before the war took his brother. The river was where they had played as children. Friedrich hadn't just lost his family to the war, he had lost his reason to fight for it. Until he heard a prisoner speak of his own loss and found a way to honor them both. This became Elena's thesis. But more than that, it became her mission. She found others, the descendants of prisoners from that fortress, the children of guards who had spoken of the quiet rebellion. She built a map of whispers, of small acts of humanity that had rippled through the war. She found Jan's family in France. Jan had survived the war, returned to his village, and opened a bakery. On his wall, a simple framed note. You changed the river's course. He had never explained it to anyone, but his granddaughter, when she heard Klaus's story, recognized the phrase. She showed Elena her grandfather's journal. The last entry read, "We were all prisoners. Some of us just had keys." Elena organized an exhibition, not about the war's battles or its politics, but about the small moments that proved humanity could survive even the darkest places. She played Klaus's broadcast. She showed Friedrich's key. She displayed Jan's journal, but the centerpiece was a simple river stone, donated by Klaus's family. On it, a single word carved, remember. Hundreds visited, thousands, and one day, an old woman approached Elena. She was frail, leaning on a cane, her eyes clear despite her years. "I was there," she whispered. "Not in the fortress, but I heard the broadcast. My father had a radio hidden in the walls. He never collaborated. He was a collaborator, again. A bureaucrat. She told Elena that her father had lost his position, his safety, everything. But he had gained something else. He had gained his soul back. One voice, she said. One voice in the darkness. And it changed the course of one man's life. And he changed mine. As Elena documented these stories, she realized the true scope of Klaus's broadcast. It wasn't just intercepted by the Germans and the Allies. It had been heard by countless others, hidden radios in occupied territories, resistance members, even German soldiers who questioned the war. Each person who heard it became a carrier of the story, each retelling a small act of resistance against the machinery of war. In her final report, Elena wrote, Klaus Haas did not win the war. He did not save thousands with his transmission, but he changed the narrative. He proved that even when surrounded by walls, by guards, by despair, a human being can choose to speak truth into the void. And sometimes, the void answers back. She found Klaus's daughter, now an old woman herself, living by a river in Switzerland. She showed her the archive files, the transcripts, the evidence that her father's voice had traveled farther than he could ever know. His daughter cried. He always thought it was a failure, she said. That he had been caught, that he had only survived by luck. He never knew. He never knew how many rivers his words had reached. Elena's exhibition traveled the world. In each city, new stories emerged. A German officer who had received a reassignment after hearing the broadcast and refused to carry out an execution. A Jewish family hidden by neighbors who had been inspired by a fragment of the story. A resistance fighter who found courage in the words, "We remember who we were before the world caught fire." The archive recording, the one Elena had first discovered, was digitized and uploaded to the internet. It became a testament that outlived paper and memory. Viewers from around the world left comments, sharing their own stories of choosing humanity over hatred, truth over convenience. But the most powerful moment came years later, when Elena received a letter from a teacher in rural Germany. The teacher had played Klaus's broadcast to her students, children born long after the war. One student, the grandson of a high-ranking Nazi official, had stood up after hearing it and asked, "What would you have done?" The class sat in silence. The question hung in the air. That, the teacher wrote to Elena, is the echo that matters. Not that Klaus spoke, but that we still ask ourselves, generations later, if we would have the courage to do the same. The river still flows, the story still travels, and somewhere someone is listening. But now, the listeners are asking their own questions. And in those questions, Klaus's victory is complete. The fortress is gone, the guards are dust, the war is history. But the voice endures. And it asks each of us, when the moment comes, when the key is in your hand and the choice is yours, will you open the door? Will you speak? Will you be human? Klaus Haas answered yes. What will your answer be? Final thoughts. This story, like all true stories of resistance and humanity, is not about heroism in the traditional sense. It is about the accumulation of small choices. Friedrich's choice to leave the key, Jan's choice to share the map, Klaus's choice to speak rather than stay silent. Each choice was a stone cast into the river. Each ripple reached farther than the last. In archives, in memories, in the quiet moments when someone hears this story and feels something shift inside them, the story continues. The war ended. But the echoes of those 3 minutes on the radio, They have never faded. They still travel the rivers of human connection, reaching new shores, new generations, new hearts. And in that, we find the true shock of Klaus's story. Not that he survived, not that he escaped, but that he understood what so many forget. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, but a voice that refuses to be silenced. The river remembers, the story travels, and we, the listeners, inherit the choice. This is not just the end of a story. It is the beginning of every question we must ask ourselves about what it means to be human in a world that often demands we be anything but. Klaus found his answer in a fortress cell, with a stolen key and a borrowed transmitter. Where will you find yours? End of continuation. The audio fades from the final question into the soft, ambient sound of a river flowing. After a few seconds, the narrator's voice returns, low and intimate, almost a whisper. Narrator: this story is now yours to carry. The archive is closed. The recordings have ended. The river in the story has long since reached the sea. But the key is not in some forgotten cell in a German fortress. And the transmitter is not a secret device in a prison camp. The key is in your hand, right now. The transmitter is your voice. The world today has its own fortresses. Fortresses of indifference, of fear, of information meant to divide us. It has its own wars, not always fought with guns, but with words that seek to dehumanize. And the question Klaus left echoing through the decades is not a historical artifact. It is a live wire. It is not about what you would have done in 1944. It is about what you will do tomorrow. When you see injustice, will you be silent? When you are told to see an enemy, will you look for the human being? When you are given the key, will you turn it? The most powerful stories are not the ones that end on a page or a screen. They are the ones that begin inside of us. So let this be more than just a story you heard. Let it be the story you decide to tell with your actions. Because the river of history is not just something we study. It is something we are all, always, flowing in. And its course is changed by every single voice that refuses to be silenced, including yours. The sound of the river swells, then slowly fades to silence. End of script. I understand you'd like me to continue this script. However, I notice that the script you've provided appears to already be complete, ending with the narrator's final words and the sound of the river fading to silence. The story seems to have reached its conclusion. Could you clarify what specific part you'd like me to continue? For example, do you want an additional epilogue? Would you like me to extend the final thoughts section? Are you looking for a new chapter or perspective on the story? If you'd like me to create a continuation, please let me know which direction you'd like the story to go in, and I'll be happy to help. Narrator: the river flows ever onward, carrying stories from distant mountains to the endless sea. We begin our tale in a village where the morning mist hangs low over the water and the old bridge has stood for 100 years, connecting the lives of those on either bank. Our hero, a young weaver named Ilara, has just finished her morning ritual of checking the threads that span the bridge, each one a reminder of promises made and journeys taken. Today she notices something unusual. A single silver thread has appeared among the copper and gold, one that hums with a melody only she can hear. This thread leads across the bridge into the unknown forest beyond. Alara knows that following it will change everything, but the song is too beautiful to ignore. She unties her work apron, places it on the bridge railing, and takes her first step toward the forest, toward the silver thread that sings of destiny. I notice there's been some confusion in your request. You've provided what appears to be two different scripts. 1. A complete story about Klaus Haas, a Wubby-Wowed prisoner who made a radio broadcast, and Elena, who uncovers the impact of his words decades later, too. A second, separate script introducing a new story about Ilara, a weaver who discovers a magical silver thread on a bridge. The first story about Klaus appears to be fully complete with a proper ending and conclusion. The second story about Ilara seems to be a completely different narrative that has just begun. Could you please clarify? Which story would you like me to continue? If it's the Ilara story, how much of the second script would you like me to build upon? I want to make sure I'm continuing the correct narrative and meeting your expectations. Please let me know specifically which story and which direction you'd like the continuation to take. Ilara followed the silver thread deeper into the forgotten archives, her fingers tracing the ancient tomes that lined the crumbling shelves. The thread pulsed with an ethereal light, leading her toward a small, ornate chest tucked behind a false bookcase. Inside, she discovered the Chronos amulet, a device rumored to bend time itself. As she clasped it around her neck, the room began to shimmer and shift. The past and future collapsed into a single moment, revealing the truth. She was not the first to find the amulet, nor would she be the last. The thread had chosen her as its next guardian, binding her to an eternal cycle of protecting the timeline from those who would abuse its power. In that instant, Ilara understood her destiny was no longer her own, but woven into the very fabric of existence itself. Narrator. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as the realization washed over her like a tidal wave of ancient knowing. The amulet against her skin was no mere artifact. It was alive, pulsing with the heartbeat of time itself. Each throbe sent ripples through the air, causing dust motes to freeze mid-dance and shadows to stretch like taffy across the stone walls. But with this revelation came a terrible burden. The amulet showed her visions, not of what could be, but of what had been threatened, what had been lost, and what she alone could now prevent. She saw a future where a shadowy figure named Malachor had twisted time itself, creating paradoxes that unraveled like frayed threads in a tapestry. Cities that existed in one moment and vanished the next. Children born without parents. History rewriting itself in cruel, impossible loops. The silver thread that led her here was no accident. It was the last unbroken strand of causality, left by her predecessor, a woman named Anya, who had sacrificed herself to freeze Malachor in a temporal prison, buying Ilara these precious years to grow strong enough to take her place. The amulet whispered to her mind, not in words, but in feelings. You are the anchor now, the weaver of the unwoven, the guardian of the moment between breaths. Ilara's hands trembled as she stepped back through the false bookcase into the weave shop. But everything had changed. The morning light streaming through her window now carried colors she had never seen, the golden wash of dawn mixed with the silver threads of time itself. Her loom, once her greatest joy, now seemed like a child's toy compared to the cosmic tapestry she now perceived. Her apprentice, a boy named Thomas, burst through the door, his face pale. Ilara, come quickly! The old bridge, it's disappearing! She ran with him, the amulet burning against her chest. At the bridge, villagers gathered in panic. The eastern half of the century-old structure was fading in and out of existence, becoming translucent, ghostly. People who tried to cross stumbled through it as if it were mist. Ilara saw it immediately. This was a temporal tear, the first sign of Malakor's prison weakening. The bridge existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, and without a guardian's intervention, it would collapse entirely, taking half the village with it into non-existence. She didn't hesitate. Pulling the amulet forward, she held it aloft and felt its power surge through her. The world slowed. The villagers froze mid-panic, their faces locked in expressions of terror. Only Ilara moved, stepping into the space between seconds. The silver thread from her workshop, still connected to the bridge, now visible even in this frozen moment. She grasped it with both hands and began to weave, not with a loom, but with intention. She pulled the thread taut, anchoring the bridge to the present moment. Each knot she tied was a moment of history, each loop a memory, each weave a promise of tomorrow. The effort was immense. She felt years pass in seconds, felt the weight of every life the bridge had ever carried. She saw the original builders, the lovers who had carved their names into the wood, the soldiers who had marched across it, the children who had played beneath it. All these moments flowed through her, and she held them together with sheer force of will. In the distance, a figure appeared at the edge of the forest, a man cloaked in shadows that moved wrong, twisting against the wind. Malakor's lieutenant, sent to test the Guardian's strength. Ilara's fingers bled from the effort of weaving time itself, but she didn't let go. She had chosen this. The amulet had chosen her, and she would not be the Guardian who failed. She pulled the silver thread tighter, and with a final, desperate effort, bound the bridge completely into the present. The tear sealed. The ghostly image solidified into wood and stone. The villagers unfroze, their panic replaced with confusion. They remembered only that the bridge had faltered, then been restored, miraculously. But Ilara saw the truth. The shadowy figure was gone, but his presence remained like a stain on the air. The amulet's pulse was slower now, weaker. It had shown her the cost of her new existence. Each time she used its power to mend the timeline, a piece of her own history would fade. Personal memories would become vague, like dreams. That was the price of being a guardian. She sacrificed her own past to preserve everyone else's future. Tomas touched her shoulder, his voice small. Ilara, your eyes, they're silver. She looked at her reflection in the river and saw that he was right. Where her irises had once been brown, they now swirled with metallic threads of silver and gold, like hourglass sand suspended in eternity. Everything has changed, she whispered, not just to him, but to the river, the sky, the very air that now carried the scent of moments yet to come. That night, as she sat in her workshop, the amulet showed her another vision, a child, born in a distant city 30 years from now, who would also have silver in their eyes. A successor, but until then she was alone in this timeless duty. The silver thread still hummed, now connected to her very soul. It tugged gently toward the west, toward mountains she had never visited, toward a place called the Kronos Spire, where other guardians had once trained. Ilara packed lightly, bread, water, a small knife, and her weaving tools. She left a note for Thomas, explaining as much as she could without frightening him. The amulet would guide her. As she stepped out into the moonlit night, the thread stretched before her like a path only she could see. It led past the village, through the forest, toward destiny itself. She took one last look at the bridge, her first victory as guardian, standing firm and eternal. Then she turned to the path ahead. Somewhere in the space between moments, Malachor stirred. And Alara, the weaver who had become the woven, walked forward to meet him. The journey had begun. Narrator. But that is only the first thread in Alara's tapestry. The silver path stretches long before her, and every step she takes will change more than just her fate. For in a world where time can be woven, the question is not just what she will become, but what we all might become when we dare to follow the threads that call to us. The amulet has chosen its guardian. The story has chosen its moment. And now, my friends, we pause at the edge of the forest, where the true adventure waits to be told. Until next time, remember, the most powerful threads are the ones we choose to follow. The sound of a single harp string resonating like a silver bell fades into the night. Narrator. But the forest had its own secrets, and the path ahead was not as straightforward as the silver thread would have Alara believe. For every guardian who had walked this path before her had faced the same 3 trials, and the amulet around her neck pulsed with the memory of their struggles. The first trial came at dawn. Alara had walked through the night, guided by the humming thread that seemed to grow brighter with each step. As the sun crested the mountains, she found herself in a clearing where 3 paths diverged. Each path was marked by a stone pillar, and carved into each pillar was a single word: past, present, and future. The amulet grew heavy, pulling her toward the path marked present. But as she stepped forward, the air shimmered, and a voice echoed from the trees, not Malachor's voice, but something older, more ancient. "Guardian," the voice whispered, "Ra, you cannot protect what you do not understand. Choose wisely, for each path reveals a truth you may not wish to see." Alara hesitated. The logical choice seemed to be present. She needed to understand the timeline she was now sworn to protect. But the amulet tugged insistently toward future. With a deep breath, she followed its guidance. The path of future twisted through time itself. She saw visions flash before her eyes, cities of crystal and light, civilizations rising and falling, oceans boiling and freezing, stars being born and dying. In the midst of it all, she saw glimpses of Malachor, not as a villain, but as a man who had lost everything and sought to undo the moment that had shattered his world. The vision showed her a child falling from a bridge, a mother screaming, a father making a desperate choice to turn back time. And the moment that choice broke reality itself. She understood now. Malachor wasn't evil, he was grief given form. A father who had tried to undo one terrible moment and, in doing so, had woven chaos into the tapestry of time. But understanding didn't change her duty. The path of future spat her out at the edge of a cliff, where the Chronos spire rose from the rocks like a finger pointing to the heavens. But the bridge to it was gone. Destroyed, or perhaps never built. The amulet whispered, "Guardians do not wait for bridges. They weave their own." Alara looked at the silver thread still trailing behind her, then at the yawning chasm. She untied the thread from her wrist, feeling the connection to her past growing fainter with each moment. Her memories of home, of Thomas's face, of the smell of bread from the village bakery, of her mother's laughter, were already becoming distant, like stories she had heard rather than lived. With careful fingers, she began to weave. Thread over thread, memory over memory, she created a bridge not of wood or stone, but of moments. Each step she took was solidified by a memory she sacrificed. The day she learned to weave, her first successful tapestry, the taste of her birthday cake from years gone by. By the time she reached the other side, she could barely remember why she had started the journey. Only the amulet's purpose remained clear. The spire's door opened before her, revealing not a fortress, but a library. Rows upon rows of books, each one a life, a timeline, a possibility. And standing in the center of it all, surrounded by the glow of 1,000 suspended moments, was Malachor. He wasn't what she expected. He looked broken. A man whose eyes held the weight of centuries, whose hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. "So you've come," he said, his voice carrying no malice, only weariness. Just as the last one did, and the one before her. He gestured to the walls where portraits hung in shimmering frames, dozens of guardians, each with silver eyes, each with the same look of determination that Alara now felt in her own heart. "They all tried to stop me," Malachor continued, "and they all succeeded for a time. But tell me, Guardian, when you stood at that chasm, when you wove your bridge from memory itself, did you not understand why I first reached for the amulet?" Ilara's hand went to the pendant at her throat. It was warm now, almost burning. "I understand loss," she said, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears, older, wiser than it had any right to be. "But I also understand that some threads must not be rewoven. Some stories must end as they began." Malachor smiled, but it was a sad, terrible thing. "Then let us see which of us breaks first, the man who cannot let go, or the guardian who must forget." He raised his hand, and the books began to fall from their shelves, pages flying like birds, each one a moment in time. The spire shook with the weight of unspooling history. Alara clutched the amulet and felt the silver thread, her thread, pull tight. She had a choice. She could try to put every book back, to mend every moment Malachor destroyed, or she could do what the amulet truly needed. She could cut the thread. With tears that shimmered silver, Ilara pulled the thread taut and made the cut. The pain was immediate and absolute. It felt like her heart was being torn in two. Every memory she had sacrificed, every moment she had given up, rushed back into her all at once, then vanished forever. But the amulet flared with pure, blinding light. Without the thread of her own past tethering her, she became something more. She became the weaving itself. The books stopped falling. Malachor froze in place, his eyes wide with understanding and horror. "No," he whispered. "Not that. Anything but that." Ilara's voice was no longer her own. It was the voice of the river, the wind, the silence between heartbeats. "You wanted to undo your loss?" she said, walking toward him, her feet not touching the ground. "I will undo you." She reached out and placed her hand on his forehead. The amulet's power flowed through her. She wasn't not destroying Malachor, but as a solution. She was unweaving him, pulling his story apart thread by thread, moment by moment, until there was nothing left but a single, perfect moment of peace. And then he was gone. Not dead, not trapped. Simply never having existed. The timeline corrected itself. The child fell, the mother screamed, the father made his choice. But without Malachor's subsequent corruption of time, those events remained tragic. The spire sighed around her. Its purpose they complete. No longer broke reality. The portraits on the wall faded one by one. The guardians who had come before her, Anya and the others, were free. Ilara stood alone in the now empty chamber, the amulet cool against her skin. She walked to the window and looked out. The world was still there. The village was still there. She could see the bridge, small and distant, but whole. But when she tried to picture Thomas's face, she couldn't. When she tried to remember her mother's laugh, the sound was gone. The price of being the weaver was that she no longer existed in the tapestry. She was outside it, looking in. The amulet pulsed once, softly, and she understood. Her duty wasn't over. There would be other threads, other tears, other moments that needed a guardian. She turned from the window and walked back toward the door. The silver thread was gone. She had cut it. But new threads were already forming,
They stretched
visible
out across
only
the
to her
world.
eyes, shimmering with possibility and danger. She was Ilara, and she was not Ilara. She was the guardian of the moment between moments, the protector of time itself. And somewhere, in a village by a river, a young weaver named Ilara woke to the morning mist, finished her ritual of checking the threads that spanned the bridge, and noticed something unusual. A single silver thread had appeared among the copper and gold, but that is a story for another day. Narrator. For every guardian who accepts the call must walk a path that separates them from the life they once knew. Ilara became legend, but the cost of that legend was her own story, forgotten by those she loved, remembered only by time itself. And yet, if you listen carefully on quiet mornings, when the mist hangs low over the water and the old bridge stands strong in the dawn light, you might hear it. A faint humming, like a silver thread vibrating in the air, reminding us that somewhere, between the ticks of the clock and the tocks of eternity, a guardian watches still. The silver thread hums on, calling to the next one who will hear its song. But that is a story yet unwritten. Until we meet again, remember, every thread has its beginning, but only the brave dare to follow where it leads. The sound of a silver bell, echoing across water and through time, fades into silence. Narrator. But every ending is merely a new beginning waiting to be woven into the tapestry of existence. While Ilara's story may have concluded in that moment of sacrifice, the threads of destiny never truly cease their endless dance. 3 years have passed since the Chronos Spire the world has healed in ways no one could have predicted. The river that once threatened to flood the village now flows gentle and calm, as if in deference to the memory of what transpired there. The bridge stands stronger than ever, its wooden planks singing a quiet harmony with the wind. In the village, life continues much as it always has. Children chase each other across the bridge, their laughter echoing in the morning mist. The weaver's shop stands empty, its door closed, its windows dark. Some say the weaver disappeared on the night the silver thread first appeared. Others say she simply moved on, her purpose fulfilled. But there are those who remember differently. Deep in the forest, where the 3 paths once diverged, a young woman tends a small garden. She has silver eyes that seem to see more than what is there, and hands that move with unnatural grace. She doesn't remember her name, or where she came from. She only remembers a feeling, a purpose that calls to her when the wind whispers through the trees. She is not Ilara, not exactly, but she is what remains when a guardian transcends their own story. Every morning, she wakes before dawn and walks to the edge of the forest, where she can see the bridge in the distance. She doesn't know why she goes there. She only knows that she must. And every morning, as the sun rises and paints the world in gold, she sees something that shouldn't exist. A single silver thread, stretching from her heart to that distant bridge, humming with a purpose she cannot name. But she is not the only one who hears the call. Far to the east, In a city of glass and steel, a clockmaker's apprentice notices something strange about his work. The clocks he builds no longer keep perfect time. Instead, they gain and lose seconds in perfect rhythm with something he cannot understand. When he mentions this to his master, the old man only smiles knowingly and hands him a silver coin. "Every clock needs a guardian," the master says, "and every guardian needs a clock." The apprentice doesn't understand, but he keeps the coin. And that night, in his dreams, he hears a faint humming. Meanwhile, in the frozen north, a child is born with eyes the color of winter sky and a cry that sounds like music. Her parents, simple farmers, are confused when they notice that the snow around their cabin has formed perfect spiral patterns, as if woven by invisible hands. The child, when she grows, will not remember this, but the patterns will remain in her dreams. For you see, when Ilara cut the thread, she didn't just save the timeline, she created something new. She became a beacon, a call that echoes across realities, reaching those who are meant to hear it. The amulet's power didn't disappear with Malachor. It simply found new hosts, new guardians, new stories waiting to be told. And somewhere in the space between moments, where time itself is woven like thread on a loom, Ilara watches. She doesn't remember her name. She doesn't remember the village, or the bridge, or the face of the man she once loved. But she remembers the knowledge that some things are worth sacrificing everything for. She sees the young woman in the forest and smiles. She sees the clockmaker's apprentice and nods. She sees the child in the north and extends her hand, though she cannot touch them. They are her legacy. They are the thread she wove when she cut her own. But the story doesn't end there, because stories like these never truly end. In the deepest vault of the Chronos spire, where the books once lay scattered and broken, a single page has appeared. It's blank at first, but as the moonlight touches it, words begin to form. They write themselves slowly, deliberately, as if by an invisible hand. When the last guardian falls, the first shall rise. When the thread is cut, the weaving begins anew. When one story ends, another begins. For time is not a line, but a circle, and guardians are the points where the circle touches itself. The page glows silver for a moment, then fades. But the words remain, etched into reality itself. And in the village by the river, an old woman sits by her fireplace, telling stories to her grandchildren. She speaks of a weaver who became a guardian, of a man who tried to undo grief, of a sacrifice that saved the world. The children listen, wide-eyed. But what happened to her? The youngest asks. Shah the Weaver? What happened to Ilara? The old woman smiles, her eyes distant. She became the story itself, she says. And now, whenever someone hears the call of a thread that cannot be seen, whenever someone chooses to follow a path that logic says doesn't exist, whenever someone sacrifices their own story for a greater purpose, Ilara is there. The children don't understand. But one of them, a girl with curious eyes, reaches up and touches her grandmother's cheek, and for just a moment, she feels something, a vibration, a hum, like a single silver string resonating in the space between heartbeats. The story is over, but the threads are just beginning to weave. Narrator. And so we come to the edge of another tale. But as any guardian of time will tell you, the edge is where the most interesting work begins. Ilara's sacrifice created not just an ending, but a beginning for countless others who now hear the silver thread's call. You may be wondering if you have heard it too. That quiet hum at the edge of your hearing. That sense that there is more to the world than what we see. That feeling that you are part of something larger, a story that spans beyond your own lifetime. Listen carefully. In the space between thoughts, between heartbeats, between the tick and the tock of the clock on your wall, perhaps nothing. Or perhaps, just perhaps, a faint, silver hum. The guardians are being called. The threads are being woven. The stories continue. Until we meet again, where all stories meet at the edge of time, remember, the most beautiful tapestries are woven from threads of sacrifice, and the greatest heroes are often those who forget they were ever heroes at all. The sound of 1,000 silver bells, each one slightly out of sync, creating a harmony that exists only in the moment of hearing, fades into the eternal silence.